It's hard to believe, but the design limitations of modern battle tanks were decided decades before the first tank was even invented, and that's because of railways. When tanks were first invented in 1915, railways were pretty much the only option to transport tanks around the country, and this holds true to this day, as alternative modes of transportation are rarely used. And this means that tanks have to be narrow enough to fit on a railway car, which limits the width of the tank. But limiting the width, in turn, limits the length of the tank, because in order for tracks to turn, they have to be of specific proportions. But why not just drive the tanks wherever they need to go? For the same reason you don't drive your Ferrari across the country. Unnecessary wear and tear, and also tanks are slow as 45 miles per hour, except for tanks in video games. Today's video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations, a free online PvP strategy game. If, like us, you are a fan of long-term strategy battles, Conflict of Nations is just right for you. Choose a real country to lead in a modern global warfare. You can use anything from tanks to nuclear submarines to build your army, declare war on your neighbors, and engage in battles to take over the world. These long-term strategy games can take weeks to complete. This game is fully cross-platform, so play Conflict of Nations with the same account on both PC and mobile devices with up to 128 other players in real time. And we bring you an exclusive offer. Click the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. This offer is only available for 30 days, so don't miss out. So, are tanks obsolete? It's easy to say yes, but that would be premature. With the whole world following the humanitarian catastrophe during the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war, military analysts are watching something else. They're learning invaluable lessons on what truly works in modern warfare. The traditional might of the Russian army versus the much smaller but well-equipped Ukrainian insurgents. This war of two highly developed nations offers a rare opportunity to see how modern weapons work, how they interact in action and counteraction. This sort of interaction is impossible to simulate in peacetime exercises. As military experts analyze the current conflict, governments are already adjusting their budgets on the fly. For instance, just last week, the Pentagon increased its counter-small drone weapon program 7-fold. Those Turkish TB2 drones are proving extremely effective in Ukraine. Additionally, Pentagon nearly quintupled its air and missile defense research line. Meanwhile, the Russian combat drone industry and its military-industrial complex is in crisis mode due to sanctions. However, Russians still may have a trump card, and it's not the nukes, but a cyber Pearl Harbor. But before we talk about what the Russian combat drones are really made of, and discuss one of the largest wartime cyber attacks that happened during the early hours of the invasion, let's go back to the tanks for a minute. The problem with tanks is an economic one. A $30,000 anti-tank missile can destroy a $10 million tank. For example, the United Kingdom supplied Ukraine with thousands of NLAW anti-tank weapons that have a range of up to 0.6 miles. Reportedly, Ukrainians call it NLAW, and have been often caught saying "God save the Queen" as they fire NLAWs into Russian tanks. Now, it's possible to counter anti-tank missiles by having an infantry screen ahead of the tank that can neutralize anyone who's trying to fire a weapon at them in the first place. However, as the range of the anti-tank missiles increases, neutralization becomes harder to do. For instance, the American Javelin system has a range of up to 2.5 miles. So, are anti-tank missiles a battleship moment for tanks? Just like how, during World War II, airplanes, aircraft carriers, and submarines rendered the massive battleships obsolete. From an economical and tactical point of view, NLAW and Javelin systems make tanks obsolete. But what about all the defense systems that tanks have? Modern tanks weigh 80+ tons and have high-tech defense systems, such as reactive armor, which explodes when it's hit to neutralize the explosive force of the incoming munition. They can also intercept incoming anti-tank missiles. Electronic warfare equipment built into tanks can incapacitate nearby drones and rockets. But it just gets too expensive too quickly, as threats become cheaper and more effective. Additionally, there are limits to how much protection you can put into a tank. The amount of armor on a tank is a compromise between mobility, protection, and firepower. Tanks do work best in open areas like deserts. In urban environments, tanks are sitting ducks, as mobile teams can be in any of the buildings firing a missile and then relocating quickly to fire again at a different tank. Even with all the modern defense systems, the scale is tipped toward cheaper countermeasures such as anti-tank missiles and drones. To date, Russian forces have lost 476 tanks according to the Ukrainian military. Open-source intelligence have verified using pictures at least 263 Russian tank losses. But here's the thing, drones and missiles cannot hold ground. Meanwhile, infantry needs armor not only to travel from point A to point B, but also to hold position. Infantry would still use protected armored vehicles, then disband the vehicles and travel on foot covertly to engage the enemy. When anti-tank missiles were developed in the early 1970s, analysts were predicting the end of tanks. Yet, that hasn't happened, as tanks were used during the Arab-Israel War, Iran-Iraq War, and the US wars in Iraq. But those wars were fought in deserts, in wide-open terrain. During the Nagorno-Karabakh War of 2020, drones dominated tanks. Similarly, during the current Russo-Ukrainian War, anti-tank missiles, drones, and even artillery are dominating armored vehicles. The future tanks are predicted to have significantly less armor and prioritize mobility over protection. Because no matter how much armor you have, the modern anti-tank weapons will destroy them anyway. While legacy armies were built around main battle tanks, the new doctrine is about combined arms. Tanks, infantry, aircraft, and artillery working together. The real problem is not that tanks can be easily destroyed, but it's a command problem. How do you manage all the assets that you have, including tanks, in the best possible way? The United States still buys about 100 tanks per year, and that's despite Marines having given up on them, calling them obsolete. The British are also procuring 148 Challenger 3 tanks. We're going to be talking about drones next, but let's briefly talk about helicopters. During the early hours of the Russo-Ukrainian War, Russia sent dozens of helicopters to Antonov Airport at Hostomel, which is northwest of Kiev, but things didn't go according to plan. While Russians attempted to eliminate the radar-controlled surface-to-air missile systems, Ukrainians started using man-portable air defense systems, or MANPADs, such as the Soviet Igla and Strela, which proved deadly. After the initial success of the Ukrainian forces, Western allies such as Germany started supplying Ukraine with Stinger anti-air missiles. Yet again, this shows the power of asymmetric warfare, where a $40,000 weapon can destroy a $15 million helicopter. Before the war began, defense experts believed that Russian forces would have little trouble dealing with a few dozens of Ukrainian drones. But everyone, including Western intelligence, also believed that Russia would achieve a swift victory in Ukraine. However, the reality is that drones are literally killing it during this war. Combat drones have been ambushing Russian convoys, while surveillance drones like the Ukrainian Leleka 100 have been guiding artillery fire. Even consumer drones like the DJI Mavic are heavily used, both by Russians and Ukrainians. A Turkish TB2 Bayraktar drone can cruise at 70 knots for up to 27 hours while carrying up to 4 small laser-guided bombs. While its operational range is up to 93 miles, military analysts suggest that the practical range is about 5 miles. There are two ways to counter the Bayraktar drone: either shoot it down with a SAM or to use electronic warfare to jam the radio data links between the drone and its ground control unit. What's interesting is that despite the Russian army having a range of SAM systems and advanced electronic warfare capabilities, they have been unable to neutralize the Bayraktar threat. One military analyst, Justin Bronk, propose the following explanation for the above. First, due to Russian forces' inability to coordinate, the columns of Russian armored vehicles rushed beyond the cover of their SAM systems. This allowed Ukrainians to seize an opportunity to ambush the columns. Secondly, it appears that Russian forces have been engaging in electronic warfare far less frequently than expected. Jamming the Ukrainian capabilities without jamming your own will be very hard without complex planning. And we all know a thing or two about Russian planning. In addition, Russian forces have substantial problems with their own communication equipment. It's been documented that the Russian military relied on cheap Chinese walkie-talkies and stolen mobile phones. So jamming radio waves would not only be trouble for Ukrainians, but for Russians as well. Keep in mind that TB2 Bayraktar drones have a smaller radar cross-section compared to a larger jet. In addition, these drones have the BSI-101 signal intelligence system that can detect and track radars of ground-based air defense systems. All this makes it harder to shoot them down. Another reason for the success of Bayraktar is the fact that the United States is guiding Ukraine on how and when to operate their drones, and this was confirmed by a US defense official. Specifically, it's believed that Ukrainians receive a go-ahead to use drones against specific targets after receiving intelligence from NATO's reconnaissance assets. The drone's success story, while impressive, only accounts for a limited number of Russian vehicles destroyed. We should probably mention that the United States recently announced that they'll provide Ukraine with killer Switchblade drones which are capable of hitting and destroying targets up to 25 miles away. Russians also appear to have been extensively using their surveillance drones. But what's really interesting is what Ukrainians found when analyzing downed Russian drones. Upon inspection of downed Russian drones such as Orlan, Aileron, Forepost, and Granat, it turned out that only airframes and parachutes were made in Russia. All the internal electronics were foreign-made, civilian-grade products. One engine was made in Japan by Saito Seisakusho, a starter generator made in the US by Texas Instruments Inc., telemetry controller made in the US by Microchip, flight controller made by European SC Microelectronics, while the GPS tracker was made in China. Aileron's photographic equipment is actually made from Sony and Olympus point-and-shoot cameras. Not a single Russian-made drone captured in Syria and Ukraine had any Russian-made electronics. The biggest weakness of Russian military-industrial complex is its inability to master the production of modern microelectronics, be it chips or other sensors. For example, even components for the Bulava missile rely on imported American microchips. But maybe there are other things that Russians are really good at. Is cyber really a game changer? Imagine a modern-day Pearl Harbor-like event, but in cyberspace. Adversaries would cripple their enemy's infrastructure by shutting down power grids, disabling satellites, and bricking all communication equipment in the country. This would end the war even before it begins. Imagine China remotely disabling the US Pacific Fleet just by a push of a button. Such an event is called a cyber Pearl Harbor. Yet military analysts point out that this is fantasyland and that cyber wars are overrated and unproven. There have not been any operational results yet. No cyber Pearl Harbors have occurred to date. What has happened is some websites being down for short periods of time. That's hardly the same as sinking 8 battleships, destroying 300 aircraft, and killing 2,400 troops. With that said, it's hard to truly judge the capabilities of adversary cyber threats because of secrecy. The vulnerabilities are usually discovered ahead of time and kept in secret until such time when those vulnerabilities are used. How many of these vulnerabilities Russia possesses is unknown. Maybe they're just waiting for the right time to unleash all of it at once, but it hasn't happened yet. But what has happened is this. 2 weeks after Russian invasion, Western officials revealed one of the largest wartime cyber attacks that was publicly disclosed. On February 24, 2022, between 5 and 9 a.m., just as Russian forces started their missile attacks upon Ukraine, hackers targeted modems that communicate with the Viasat Ka-sat satellite, which supplies internet access to customers in Europe, including Ukrainian military and police units. The affected modems were completely out of commission. Not a single light on the Viasat-made devices would turn on. Viasat said that misconfiguration in the management section gave hackers remote access into the modems. To bring them back online, each modem would need to be programmed by a technician on site or be completely swapped out. The benefits of this cyber attack is obvious, as it could hinder communication between Ukrainian military units. Traditional land-based radios can only reach so far. This also explains why Elon Musk donated truckloads of Starlink systems to Ukraine. What's interesting is that at least 3 wind turbines in Germany were acknowledged to use Viasat modems that were hacked. The result was that wind turbines could not be monitored or controlled remotely. They still generated electricity as they were operational nominally. But still, you get the picture. Imagine someone hacks into windmill farms and remotely messes the settings that can permanently destroy the farm. According to experts, the cyber attack was conducted by professionals, and the purpose was clear: to disrupt the internet connections in certain areas. There was no economic motive. It's widely believed that Russians were behind the cyber attack. 3 weeks after the attack, many modems still remain unoperational. Thanks again to Conflict of Nations for sponsoring today's video. Click on the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Download the game and take advantage of this exclusive offer, only available for 30 days.